The neon sign above Mama Rosie's diner flickered like it always did, 3 buzzing letters short of a full welcome. Outside, the cold bit through the night like it had teeth, and the streets of Albany were slick with a thin layer of freezing rain. It was the kind of night where even hope stayed indoors. Inside, the diner was quiet. The radio played some scratchy holiday tune that no one was listening to, and the only smell stronger than burnt coffee was bleach. Tamara Jenkins wiped down the same table for the 3rd time, not because it was dirty, but because it gave her hands something to do, something other than ache. She was in her late 40s then, but the years had added more to her bones than to her birthdays. Her apron was faded, her shoes were worn, and her smile, when it appeared, carried a weight that only those who'd worked their whole lives for almost nothing could understand. The door jingled once at 11:14 p.m., and she looked up out of habit, expecting the usual drifter or trucker on a graveyard route. But instead she saw them, 2 children, standing just beyond the glass. They were small, maybe 10, 12? A boy and a girl. Their clothes were mismatched, far too thin for this kind of cold. The boy had 1 glove, the girl had none. Their cheeks were red from windburn, and their eyes locked onto the pies inside the display case like it was Christmas morning in a world where hunger didn't exist. Tamara didn't move for a moment. No one else noticed them, because no one else was there, but she saw, and she remembered. She opened the door. The chime rang again. "You 2 lost?" she asked, soft, but steady. The boy nodded before he had words. The girl clutched his sleeve like it was her last tether to earth. Tamara didn't ask where they came from. Not yet, not when their lips were blue and their fingers trembled. "Come in," she said, her voice breaking just a little. "Come sit. I'll get something warm." She slid into the corner booth near the heater. The girl might look like she might cry just from the warmth. She walked into the kitchen without asking permission from anyone, because there was no manager this late and no one to scold her but the ghosts of rules made by people who'd never missed a meal. She made 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and poured 2 cups of hot cocoa, adding whipped cream from the can with a quiet dignity. "She don't have to know," she whispered to the empty kitchen, meaning the owners, the rules, the world. When she placed the food in front of them, the boy mumbled, "Thank you," but the girl just stared, then whispered the first and last thing she'd say that night. "Are you an angel?" Tamara chuckled and blinked fast. "Nah, baby, just tired." They ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was sacred. She let them stay. She brought them blankets from her car. And when she woke up at the end of her shift, sprawled on the booth across from theirs, they were gone. No names, no goodbye, just 2 napkins folded neatly and placed side by side. On them were tiny crayon drawings, one of a smiling waitress beside 2 children, and the other of a house with a heart above it. She kept those napkins in a shoebox beneath her bed for 18 years. And on the day the helicopter landed in her backyard, she would take them out again. Tamara Jenkins' days blurred together like colors on a damp canvas. Gray, blue, brown. Each one slid into the next, as predictable as the sound of her alarm clock and the ache in her knees. 18 years had passed since the night she fed those 2 children. Not a soul came back looking for her, and she never spoke of it. Not to coworkers, not to the pastor, not even to herself. She never expected anyone to. Her life was a stitched patchwork of small routines. Up at 6, oatmeal if she had milk, toast if she didn't. A lukewarm shower, walk to the bus stop wearing the same coat she'd mended too many times to count. Work, home, sleep. The diner had closed down 4 years ago.
New management bought the lot and turned it into a self-serve smoothie bar with neon signage and music so loud it made her fillings hum. Tamara hadn't set foot inside. After that, she cleaned rooms at a roadside motel off Route 9. Not glamorous, but it paid enough to keep the lights on, mostly. The manager, Charlie, called her T. He always said it like it was short for something sweet, but Tamara knew it was just easier for him than saying her full name. Men like Charlie liked shortcuts, for words, for people, for truth. Her hands had become maps of her labor, calloused fingers, swollen knuckles, joints that cracked like old wood. She worked through them all. Pain didn't stop the beds from needing to be made. Some nights she would lie on her couch, a thrift store relic with a spring poking through the cushion, and stare at the shoebox she kept on the shelf. Inside, 2 crayon napkins, still folded like prayers, a picture of her mother, who had taught her how to make grilled cheese with butter, not margarine. A letter she never mailed, addressed to whoever they became. Sometimes she'd open it. Most times she didn't. The neighbors never asked much. Miss Tamara was the kind of woman you waved to politely but didn't pry into. She didn't have family. She didn't go out much, but her porch light always came on at dusk, and her house smelled faintly of vanilla, no matter the season. The weight of ordinary days is quiet, but it is not light. It wears you slowly, like wind over stone, like time over memory. One Sunday morning, Tamara found herself sitting at the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. The radio buzzed with the voice of a pastor, reminding his congregation that what you plant in kindness you may never harvest in time, but it will bloom in someone's season. She smiled, barely. "Someone's season," she whispered. Then she got up, put on her worn coat, and went to work. She never imagined that her season would bloom with the sound of rotors in the sky. But life, like kindness, sometimes arrives in silence, then lands in thunder.
It began as a low hum, not unusual, not at first, just the kind of background noise Tamara had grown used to tuning out. Maybe a passing plane, maybe the old delivery truck backfiring 3 streets over. But the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the very windows of her small, weather-worn house on Elmwood Avenue. The dishes in her cupboard rattled gently, dust lifted from the corners of forgotten picture frames. Even the porch light flickered, as if unsure whether to keep glowing or bow out. Tamara stood frozen in the doorway of her kitchen, half a mug of instant coffee trembling in her grip. "What in the—" she muttered. Then came the unmistakable chop of helicopter blades slicing through the air above her roof. She threw on her coat before she could talk herself out of it, heart thudding like a drum in her chest. By the time she pushed open the back door, her yard had turned into a whirlwind, loose papers flying, a flower pot tipped over, the laundry she'd hung earlier flapping madly on the line. Then the blades slowed and stopped. Silence pressed in again, but it was a new kind of silence, tense, waiting. The helicopter door opened with a mechanical hiss. A tall man stepped out, his coat tailored, his shoes spotless despite the mud. Behind him, a young woman in sunglasses and a headset followed, clipboard in hand. They looked like they belonged to another world, one where wealth bought airspace and time. Tamara didn't move from her porch. The man walked forward, not hurried, not hesitant. When he was close enough to speak, he removed his sunglasses and smiled. That smile. She didn't recognize the man, not at first. The lines on his face were too different, too formed, but there was something in the eyes. "Miss Jenkins," he said, voice warm, full, practiced. She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to show up like this. I wasn't sure how else to find you. My name is Jordan West." She blinked. The name rang faintly, like a bell in another room. And then 2 children, 1 glove, a crayon drawing on a napkin. Her voice cracked before it left her throat. You
You're the boy." He smiled wider, and now she could see it, all of it. The same eyes, the same solemn kindness. "I was," he said softly. "You gave us a meal, a warm booth, a blanket." The young woman behind him stepped forward. "Mr. West wanted to find you for years. It took time, but here we are." Tamara's knees gave a little. She steadied herself on the railing. "Why now?" she whispered. Jordan's voice lowered, something deeper settling into it. "Because kindness like yours doesn't disappear. It plants something. And when it grows, you go back to where it was first planted." He gestured to the helicopter. "May I come in?" Tamara hesitated, then opened the door wide. For the first time in 18 years, someone stepped into her home not because they had to, but because they remembered.
Jordan West sat quietly on Tamara's thrift store couch, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His coat, expensive and tailored, looked almost out of place against the peeling wallpaper and the mismatched cushions. But Jordan didn't seem to notice. His eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the details: framed photos of strangers who must have been family, a clock stuck at 2:47, and the faint smell of vanilla and old books. The young woman who had come with him stood beside the window. Her name, Tamara had learned, was Nyla. She was in her mid-20s, with high cheekbones, a notebook always in hand, and eyes that missed nothing. But she said very little. Instead, she stood there, beside the window, watching. Tamara noticed her quiet presence just as much as she noticed Jordan's warmth. It was the kind of quiet that came from growing up watching the world from behind a glass pane, unsure whether you belonged inside or out. After a moment, Tamara turned back to Jordan. "I still can't believe it's you. That night, I didn't even know your name. You gave us food. You didn't ask for anything. I didn't need anything. Except maybe to know you were okay." Jordan leaned forward slightly. "We were taken in by a church a few miles out the next day. Someone saw us walking the highway and stopped. We were placed in a foster home, eventually adopted. I never forgot that booth, that warmth. You gave us more than food." "You remember all that?" she asked. "I remember the way you looked at us, like we mattered." Tamara swallowed hard. Her throat was suddenly dry. Nyla finally spoke, her voice clear and steady. "He searched for you for years, Miss Jenkins. When the company launched our philanthropic arm, he said it had to start with her, the woman who didn't turn away." Tamara laughed quietly, a little embarrassed. "Baby, I'm no hero. I was a waitress in a tired uniform with cold feet and a drawer full of overdue bills." "You were hope," he said simply. Outside the window, snow had started falling again, softly this time. Less like a storm and more like a memory. Nyla stepped back from the glass and walked slowly toward Tamara. "Can I show you something?" Tamara nodded, unsure. Nyla opened the leather folder she'd been holding and handed her a photograph. It was old, worn at the edges, but instantly recognizable. A scan of a crayon drawing on a diner napkin. A picture of a woman with big glasses standing beside two stick-figure children holding sandwiches. Tamara's breath caught. "You kept this?" Jordan smiled. "My sister, Grace, drew it. She passed away 2 years ago." Tamara placed her hand over her mouth. "I'm so sorry." "She'd want you to have it. Show has called you the angel of Booth 9. Silence fell over the room. Thick, gentle, like snow. Tamara held the drawing to her chest. The girl beside the window said nothing more. She simply watched. But as the wind outside slowed and the afternoon light crept across the floor, Tamara noticed something different in Nyla's eyes. Not detachment. Recognition. The kind that came from a life touched indirectly
by Grace.
Later that evening, after the helicopter had flown off to refuel and Jordan had taken a call in the hallway, Tamara found herself sitting at the kitchen table across from Nyla. The small space felt both familiar and unfamiliar now, a stage on which the past had unexpectedly stepped forward for an encore. Tamara stirred a cup of peppermint tea she'd made out of habit. The chipped mug, the soft ticking of the wall clock, the yellowing curtains, everything around them belonged to another time. Yet the presence of this quiet, sharp-eyed woman in designer boots grounded the moment in the now. Nyla finally broke the silence. "May I ask you something, Miss Jenkins?" Tamara looked up and nodded. "Of course, baby." "Why did you do it back then? With nothing in your pockets, why feed two strangers?" Tamara smiled faintly. "Because I knew that kind of hunger. The kind that makes your bones ache. And I knew what it was like to be passed over. People used to look right through me like I wasn't there. When I saw those kids, I couldn't be another pair of eyes that turned away." Nyla stared at her a moment, then opened her notebook and slid out a photo. "This is the only picture we found from that day. It was in a broken camera recovered from a storage unit. One image survived." Tamara leaned closer. The photo showed a blurry shot of the diner, taken from outside the window. Inside, a woman stood in a booth holding a steaming plate. Two small heads peeked up from the seat, barely visible, but unmistakable. She inhaled sharply. That's me." Nyla nodded. "But it doesn't capture everything. Not the way you tucked that boy's jacket tighter around his shoulders. Not the way you split your sandwich in half when the cook was too slow. Not the way you hummed Coco, like it was a ritual and not a rescue." Tamara's eyes welled. "That camera, it didn't need to. I remember." Nyla closed her notebook. "Jordan talks about that night like it changed the axis of his life. You gave him proof that kindness could exist without strings, that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than what the world expected of a black boy." Tamara touched the edge of the photo. "He already was more. You don't wait for the world to crown you. You build your own crown, even if it's made of string and hope." The front door creaked open. Jordan stepped into the kitchen, phone gone, eyes tired but steady. "I hope she's not bothering you," he said, nodding toward Nyla. "She's good company, makes a fine truth-teller." Jordan smiled. "I told her she'd like you." Tamara leaned back in her chair. "So what now, Mr. West? You found the old lady who handed you a grilled cheese and half a prayer. What happens after the helicopter leaves for good?" Jordan walked over and placed a small velvet box on the table. Tamara stared. "What's that?" He opened it gently. Inside sat a gold pendant, simple, elegant. A single word engraved on the back. Home. He said, "I bought the house next door. We're building something there, a place for mothers, orphans, survivors. It'll be called the Jenkins House, if that's all right with you." Tamara covered her mouth again, the pendant shimmering like a tiny sun between them. "This world," Jordan continued, "needs to remember what it looks like to be loved by a stranger." From the hallway, Nyla snapped one photo. No flash, no posing. This one, Tamara knew, would capture everything the first camera couldn't. The house next door had once been abandoned, its windows boarded up, its walls peeling like forgotten wallpaper dreams. Now, just 2 months after Jordan West's helicopter landed in the gravel outside Tamara's home, the house stood reborn. Bright white trim hugged soft brick walls, wide windows welcomed in the sun, and a wraparound porch curled like an arm ready to embrace. But tonight, what made the house come alive wasn't the renovation. It was the sound of laughter, of dishes clinking, of life returning. Inside, a long oak table stretched across the center of the dining room. It had taken Jordan weeks to find the right one, handcrafted by local black artisans, engraved with the words, "Every seat earned, every story sacred." Tamara stood near the kitchen doorway, apron dusted with flour, a wooden spoon in hand. She wore the same gold pendant Jordan had given her, now resting quietly against her chest. Her eyes moved over the room, still adjusting to what it had become. Naila sat beside a woman from Ghana who had just moved into the shelter with her newborn daughter. Across the table, a teenage boy with a foster background nervously buttered a biscuit, while Jordan guided a shy child toward the macaroni. "I didn't think they'd all come," Tamara whispered as Jordan stepped beside her. "They came for you. They don't even know it yet, but they feel it." "Feel what?" "That someone cared before the world told them they weren't worth caring about." The food was simple: roast chicken, collard greens, sweet potatoes, biscuits, peach cobbler. It wasn't fancy, but the aroma filled the rooms like a hymn, warm, rooted, real. Tamara brought out the last tray, placing it gently beside the cornbread. Everyone hushed. Jordan tapped a glass. "Before we eat, I want you to meet the reason any of this is here." He gestured to Tamara, who froze. "Miss Tamara Jenkins fed 2 hungry kids nearly 2 decades ago. I was one of them. She didn't ask who we were or what we could offer. She saw pain and answered it with a plate of food." He paused, letting the words settle like dust in sunlight. "Because of her, I knew what dignity looked like. Because of her, I believed there was still grace left in the world. So I built this home, not just in her honor, but in her image." Tamara cleared her throat, overwhelmed. "Y'all don't have to say all that," she mumbled, smiling shyly. "But we do," Naila said gently, "because most people who save others never get told they did." There was silence, then one clap, then another. Soon the room echoed with applause, sincere, rising like a tide. As they sat to eat, stories spilled out. A boy shared how he'd once slept under library steps. A mother admitted she hadn't heard her baby laugh until last week. A young girl recited a poem she had written about running away and finding something softer to run into. Tamara listened, her heart full in a way she hadn't been in years. Halfway through dinner, the youngest child, a 5-year-old girl with giant curls, tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Tamara, this is the bestest dinner I ever had." Tamara knelt down. "And you, Sweet Pea, are the bestest reason to cook it." Later that night, after the dishes were cleaned and the kids were asleep in their new beds, Tamara sat alone on the porch. The air smelled like night jasmine and slow redemption. She rocked gently in the chair Jordan had bought just for her. As the stars blinked awake above, she whispered into the dark, "Mama, you seein' this?" And somewhere between the wind and the hush of a world made gentler, she felt the answer settle in her bones. "Yes, baby, I see it. You did good." Tamara had always known quiet, not the gentle kind that came with peace, but the kind that settled heavy in the corners of a life spent surviving. It was the quiet of early morning shifts, of walking home alone after midnight, of hearing your stomach grumble and pretending it didn't. But this quiet, the one that filled the house tonight, was different. It was alive. She stood in the hallway, barefoot on the new hardwood floors, listening to the breathing of children asleep in their rooms. The hum of the heater whispered warmth, and outside, the trees rustled softly in the night wind. This wasn't the quiet of absence. This was the quiet of presence, of things finally being where they belonged. Jordan stepped into the hallway, a cup of tea in his hand. He handed it to her without saying a word, then leaned against the opposite wall. "They're already calling it Tamara House," he said with a tired smile. "I tried to name it something else, but the kids voted." She chuckled. "I ain't never had nothing with my name on it except an overdue light bill." "Well, now it's a home. And it's yours. They wanted it that way." She sipped the tea, her hands cupping the mug like it was the last warm thing in the world.
You really think we can keep it going? The bills, the staff, the food, the kids. I didn't bring you here for a few months of good press. This is permanent. The foundation I set up, it's got funding for 10 years minimum. And I got friends who want in. Why? Because you showed me what enough looks like when you have nothing. Now it's my turn to show what plenty can do. Tamara stared out the window at the moonlight resting on the porch railing. You could have just sent a check, she said. Jordan looked down. I could have. But I needed you to know. That night changed my life. I didn't just want to give back. I wanted you to see what you started. A long silence passed between them, one of understanding, not hesitation. Then Tamara said something she hadn't said in years. I'm scared. Jordan didn't flinch. Me too. What if I mess it up? What if someone don't like the way I talk or cook or the way I carry myself? Then they'll learn what grace looks like with a backbone. Tamara, this house isn't just bricks. It's the answer to 1,000 quiet prayers. Yours, mine, and every kid who lays their head on a pillow tonight thinking the world forgot about them. She wiped her eyes and laughed softly. You always talk like you're trying to win an award. I already did. I found you. They stood together in that hush, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for noise, because nothing needs to be said. Later, after Jordan had gone back to his guest room and the tea had gone cold, Tamara sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open before her. She wrote down a list titled, What I Promise. I promise to keep the front door open longer than the world wants it to be. I promise to learn every child's name and never forget what they like on their pancakes. I promise to rest too, because love don't last if it burns out. I promise to not let fear be louder than faith. I promise to remember that even the smallest act of kindness can echo for decades. When she finished, she closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf beside the sink, and turned out the light. Somewhere upstairs, a child stirred in their sleep, and Tamara smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow would come. The work would begin again. But tonight, in the soft, unwavering quiet, a promise had been made. And Tamara Jenkins always kept her promises.
At exactly 9 a.m. on a Monday, the knock came. It wasn't timid or uncertain. It was sharp, calculated, professional. Tamara, who had just finished flipping blueberry pancakes for the third child who insisted they didn't like oatmeal, turned toward the sound with an instinctive heaviness in her chest. Hold on, baby, she said, handing the spatula to Miss Corinne, the retired schoolteacher who now volunteered at the house. Let me see who that is. She wiped her hands on a towel, straightened the collar of her flannel, and walked to the wide front door. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouettes, 2 figures in dark coats, standing too straight to be casual. When she opened it, the cold rushed in before their voices did.
Good morning. Are you Tamara Jenkins?
She hesitated. Depends on who's asking. The taller of the two, a woman with a glossy ponytail and clipboard in hand, offered a crisp smile. We're with Modern Impact Weekly. I'm Alina Ross. This is my producer, Greg. We'd like a moment of your time. Tamara blinked. The magazine? Yes. You've been nominated for our Human Light Award. Jordan Wright told us a little about what you're doing here. We'd love to do a feature, full-page interview, photos, maybe even a video segment. Your story has been making waves. Tamara said slowly. I didn't know there was a wave. Alina laughed. It started with a single tweet from Jordan. Over 2 million likes. People are calling this place a modern miracle, a real-life redemption story. You're trending. Tamara stepped back slightly. We just fed the kids and tried to keep the roof dry. That's exactly why people care. Behind them, 2 more cars pulled up. A local news van, a delivery truck marked with the logo of a national grocery chain. Two young women in yoga pants holding clipboards and eco-tote bags walked up the path like they belonged there. Are they with you? Tamara asked, eyebrows raised. Nope. Looks like the world's caught on. She stood frozen for a moment. Then the door opened wider. Y'all better come in then before somebody tries to live stream from the mailbox. That was the beginning. By the end of the week, Tamara had been interviewed on local TV, radio, and podcasts. A video of her telling the story of the night she fed two strangers had gone viral, accompanied by soft piano music and heartstring-tugging edits. People mailed letters. Strangers sent quilts, hand-drawn pictures from schoolchildren, and enough donated canned food to stock the pantry for a year. A major kitchen appliance company offered to redo the house's entire cooking setup at no cost. But not everything felt like a blessing. By the third day, a reporter asked, "Do you consider yourself a modern-day saint?" Another, "Do you think this proves the American dream still exists for everyone?" Tamara, sitting in front of the fireplace with 3 kids curled at her feet, replied plainly, "I think I'm just somebody who couldn't walk past a hungry child. The rest is y'all's doing." The pressure grew. Bloggers speculated on her background. Photos of her old, run-down apartment surfaced online. Some stories praised her grace. Others questioned her past. One article titled, "From Pancakes to Philanthropy, Can One Woman Really Handle It All?" bothered her more than she wanted to admit. That night, when the camera crews left and the lights dimmed, Tamara sat on the porch steps alone for the first time in days. Jordan walked out and handed her a cup of peppermint tea, his usual peace offering. "It's a lot," he said, reading her face. She nodded. "I didn't ask for any of this. I wanted to feed kids, give them what I didn't have. Now I feel like a hashtag." "You're more than that. And the ones who know your heart, they see past all the noise." Tamara looked up at the stars, constant, distant, untouched by the chatter of the world. "Fame don't feed a hungry child," she said quietly. "No," Jordan agreed. "But it might just bring you the tools to do more than you ever imagined." She thought about that. And in the stillness, she whispered, not to Jordan, not to the cameras, but to the girl that she used to be, the one who worked the night shift with sore feet and an aching heart. "All right, world. You came knocking. Let's see what you really came for." He had a scar above his left eyebrow. Faint, like a memory the skin hadn't let go of. Most people didn't notice it, but Tamara did. She remembered the night he stumbled into her booth, clinging to his sister's hand like he was the only thing standing between her and the world. His eyes had been too grown for his age. Eyes that didn't flinch when the waitress said, "You okay, baby?" Eyes that had seen too much. That night, she asked no questions. She'd fed them. And when they left, she'd watched them disappear into the dark like paper boats down a storm drain. Fragile and too quiet. Now, 18 years later, he stood in front of her, no longer a boy. "My name's Caleb," he said, voice deep and steady. "But I think you already know that." He wore a suit tailored so perfectly it almost looked casual. His sister, now a young woman in a long olive coat, stood beside him with the same posture she had as a child. Chin up, shoulders squared, like survival had made her proud. Tamara didn't say anything at first. Her heart moved too fast. "You used to hold her hand," she finally said. Caleb's eyes softened. "I still would if she let me." His sister smiled. "Only if I'm crossing traffic." They laughed together, and Tamara felt something crack gently open inside her, a memory dislodged from the deep shelf where grief and hope cohabited in silence. Caleb stepped closer. "I've thought about this moment since I was 11. I rehearsed what I'd say over and over, but now that I'm here, you don't have to say anything. You're here. That's enough." "No, ma'am, it's not. You fed us that night, but it wasn't just food. You gave us something I didn't know we needed. Proof that someone saw us, that we mattered, and that maybe, just maybe, kindness didn't have to come with a price. Tamara felt the weight of those words settle into the deepest part of her. We ended up in the system a few days after that. Bounced around a bit, but we stayed together, always. And every single time it got hard, we'd say, "Remember the waitress?" Tamara blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "We made you a whole proverb." She laughed, the sound caught between joy and disbelief. "Y'all made me a whole proverb?" "We did. And when Caleb got his scholarship, when I got into medical school—" "You did?" Tamara cut in. The young woman nodded. "First in my class." "Lord have mercy," Tamara whispered, hands to her mouth. "And when Caleb launched his nonprofit to fund food programs across the country, we both knew the first person we needed to honor was the woman who made everything possible." Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a pin. Gold. Simple. Elegant. "It's not much, but it's the first Honor of Light award. We named it after you." Tamara didn't know what to say. "You lit something in us," he said, "and we've been carrying that flame ever since." She didn't cry immediately. It came in waves, soft, uncontrollable, healing. They stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that says everything. And then, as the sun slipped down behind the hills, casting gold across the porch, Tamara looked at them, the boy who never forgot, the girl who grew tall beside him, and said, "Come inside. It's chilly night." Because even legends have soup to stir, and even heroes need a home to return to.
The morning after Caleb and his sister stayed the night, Tamara awoke to a world she barely recognized. Her phone, usually silent except for the occasional robocall or grocery store promotion, buzzed off the kitchen table like a shaken soda can. Messages poured in, names she hadn't heard in years, numbers she didn't recognize. And then came the knock. She opened the door to find 3 local news reporters standing on her porch, notebooks in hand, cameras already rolling. Behind them, parked in a crooked line on her dusty lawn, were 2 vans with network logos slapped across their sides like parade floats. "Miss Jenkins," the first reporter asked, voice clipped with polite urgency, "is it true? Did Caleb Roman land a helicopter at your house yesterday?" Tamara blinked. "Excuse me?" "Caleb Roman, CEO of Nourish Now. He mentioned you in a live stream this morning, said a woman named Tamara Jenkins was the reason he started his mission." Another reporter jumped in. "He called you the waitress who changed everything. Do you have any comment?" Tamara took a step back. The words felt too big to belong in her little house. Inside, Caleb stirred a pot of coffee like nothing had changed. But when he saw the crowd through the kitchen window, he sighed. "I told you we should have left at sunrise," he muttered to his sister. "You said it'd be fine," she replied with a pointed glance. Caleb set the coffee down and walked out to the porch. "I'll handle this," he said gently to Tamara. And he did. He stepped forward, confident but not arrogant, and asked the reporters to lower their cameras. "This woman gave us warmth when we had nothing. She is not looking for the spotlight. Please respect that." But news didn't work that way anymore. By noon, Tamara's face was on every local headline. The waitress who fed a CEO. From chili to change, the story behind Nourish Now. One act of kindness 18 years ago. The photo they used was one Caleb had taken just the night before. Tamara standing at the stove, laughing as she stirred chili, the steam curling around her like a crown. She hated how good it looked. By evening, a neighbor she hadn't seen in years brought over a casserole and said, "I always knew you were special." Tamara thanked her politely, but inside she felt lost. "It's too much," she told Caleb later, as they sat on the porch. He nodded. "I know, but this isn't about fame, Tamara. It's about story.
about people seeing that small acts ripple, that kindness matters. She looked at him. And what if I didn't want to matter this way? He paused. Then we'll make it right. Tell me what you need. Tamara didn't answer right away. The truth was, she didn't know what she needed. For most of her life, she'd kept her head down, did her job, paid her bills. She never expected to be part of something larger than herself. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind. The old mobile above her bed spun slowly, casting soft shadows on the ceiling. Little paper stars she'd cut out 20 years ago when dreams still felt possible. In the silence, she thought of all the people who'd passed through her diner booth. Truck drivers, teenagers, single moms, broken souls, and wondered how many she'd touched without knowing it. Maybe she didn't need to run from the headlines. Maybe she just had to hold them lightly. By morning, she wrote a note and slipped it under Caleb's bedroom door. If they want the truth, I'll give them the truth, but only if we tell it together.
It began with a phone call from the mayor's office. Tamara was in the backyard, watering a wilting potted plant she'd meant to replace for years, when Caleb handed her the phone with raised eyebrows. "They want to host something," he said, "for you." "For me?" she repeated, already uncomfortable. "It's more of a community gathering," he added carefully. "They want to thank you, and maybe hear your side of the story." Tamara thought of saying no. She almost did. But something in her heart shifted, not out of pride, but out of a quiet sense of responsibility. If the story was going to be told, let it be told right. Let them know she wasn't a saint, just a woman who saw hunger and responded with a bowl of chili and a warm booth. So, on a clear Friday night, the entire town gathered in the square. String lights were strung from the old courthouse to the lampposts, casting golden glows across the faces of neighbors, strangers, and press who had returned like moths to light. Food trucks lined the perimeter. A jazz trio played near the fountain. Children ran barefoot, chasing the sound of joy. At the center was a small wooden stage, simple, unadorned. And on it stood Tamara. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer surrealness of it all. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and looked out at the faces she'd known for decades, some kind, some curious, all waiting. "I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds," she began, voice soft but steady. "Usually I'm just taking your orders for pancakes or pouring your second cup of coffee." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. "But I guess kindness doesn't always ask for a stage. Sometimes it just asks for a moment. That night, I didn't know those kids were homeless. I didn't know they'd become someone the world admired. I just knew they were cold and hungry and needed someone not to look away." She paused, heartful. "I never expected anything in return. But I see now, what you give doesn't always come back the same way. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it lands in your backyard in a helicopter." The crowd laughed again, warmer now. She smiled, then looked at Caleb and his sister, standing just off stage. "These two beautiful souls didn't just survive. They thrived. And now they're giving more than I ever could. I'm proud of them, but I didn't change the world. I just held the door open for it." A hush fell over the square. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Not the thunderous applause of a concert or a celebrity appearance, but the kind of clapping that builds from the heart. A standing ovation from neighbors, from strangers, from people who had been waiting to believe in something simple and true again. That night, the town didn't hustle or race. There were no headlines shouted or cameras flashing. Just a quiet reverence in the air, as if time itself paused to listen. Children fell asleep on their mothers' laps beneath the stars. Elderly couples swayed to the music without moving their feet. And in a town that had long been overlooked, something sacred was restored.
dignity, hope, and the idea that goodness still matters. Back home that night, Tamara stood on her porch and looked out at the stars. Caleb joined her with 2 mugs of tea. "You spoke from the heart," he said. "I spoke from my truth." And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen.
Winter came soft that year. No blizzards, no biting winds, just a gentle hush that blanketed the town in silence and snow. Tamara stood in the kitchen of her new home, her hands warm around a ceramic mug. The walls smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. Outside the window, the world was whitewashed with frost, but inside, it was all warmth and low-humming jazz on the radio. Grace hadn't returned in years, not since she left town to live with distant family after her brother died. She and Tamara used to be close, co-workers at the diner, confidants during the hardest nights, but time had a way of scattering people like leaves. Then one day, without warning, she reappeared. The knock at the door was tentative, almost apologetic. When Tamara opened it, she nearly dropped her tea. Grace looked older, thinner. Her coat was too big for her frame, and her eyes, once sharp with mischief, were tired. But there was still that little smile, the one Tamara remembered from their late-night shift breaks. "I heard about the helicopter," Grace said, hugging herself. "Figured you finally made it to heaven." Tamara laughed, then cried, then pulled her friend into a tight embrace. They sat for hours at the kitchen table, catching up in halting pieces about where life had taken them, about the people they lost, and the wounds they didn't talk about when they were younger. At one point, Grace grew quiet. She said softly, "I never told you, but that night you fed those kids, it reminded me why I stayed. For a long time, I'd given up on people, but you didn't." Tamara looked down. "I didn't do anything special." "You did something good," Grace corrected, "and sometimes that's rarer." Later that evening, Caleb and Melody joined them. Melody had made hot cider from scratch and brought in old photo albums. They all sat on the living room floor, flipping through decades of forgotten faces. There was a photo of Tamara in her diner uniform, holding a pie with a crooked smile, one of Grace on Halloween dressed as a cat, a blurry photo of a snowstorm, the diner windows glowing behind it. And then near the back was a photo no one remembered taking. It was grainy, probably from a security camera, but unmistakable. Tamara sitting at a booth with 2 tiny figures, one boy, one girl, sharing a plate of eggs and toast. No captions, no date, just the truth, frozen in time. They stared at it in silence. Melody reached for Tamara's hand. "That was the night. Everything changed," she whispered. Tamara smiled through the swell in her throat, not because she sought credit, not because she wanted the memory to be celebrated, but because in that instant, everything felt complete. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Tamara sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a thick knit blanket. The sky was clear, full of stars, and the snow beneath glowed blue under the moonlight. She thought about how far she had come, from greasy aprons and quiet sacrifices, to helicopter landings and news crews, to a night like this. Quiet, simple, and whole. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman who had been forgotten. She felt like a woman who had come home. To herself. To her purpose. To Grace.